Now today we're going to look at floral foam and the right way to use it and how, like, the reasons why you want to use it. So what is floral foam? It's this green, almost like a spongy styrofoam that's used to hold for fresh flowers. It holds water and it helps provide them with a water source and will help them last longer. An alternative would be to use what is known as foam free, which is using no foam, and you use other ways to hold your flowers in place. This is really great for beginners to use because it helps you give way more control to your flowers and making them stay right where you want, so you can work on other things like the elements and principles of design and that kind of stuff when you're learning how to design. It also works really well with certain containers. It's just easier to use than no foam at all, or even like if you wanted to use chicken wire, that would be an alternative to foam. I personally think that you should learn how to use it, just because there are instances when it is really the only way to arrange something properly. But there are a lot of foam-free alternatives out there. But today we're going to look at how to use it properly, because I think that's something that a lot of people do wrong. So the first thing is you want to soak it really well. It needs to be completely wet before you even try to use it. So I like to use just a regular storage bin tote. Anything will work that you can submerge the foam in. I could even fit a couple more bricks in here and soak them all at once if I was doing a ton of arrangements. But for right now, this one brick of foam will work good for me. I like to also, when you're soaking, you want to make sure you're mixing your water, your flower food and water together before you're soaking your foam. That way, the foam will also soak up the goodness from the flower food. And so I'm going to go ahead and soak the foam, and then I'll show you what to do next. So I filled my tote with water. I measured this out. It wound up being like 8 quarts, which looks like it's about halfway full. And then I added the amount of flower food that was required for that. So when you're adding flower food, just make sure you're following the directions on the packet or container that you're using to get it to where it's going to be most beneficial for your flowers. So now that that's all prepped, we can just go ahead and add the floral foam. Just drop it right in there, and you'll start to see it's slowly soaking up the water. And we just kind of got to wait for it to soak. There it goes, soaking up the water there. And we just gotta wait. Even though it looks like it's completely wet, it isn't yet. We want to make sure that we let it soak well. And you know when it's completely done when it sinks to the bottom, but we don't always have time for that, so I'm just going to check it in about 15 to 20 minutes. And if you cut into it and it is got dry spots, it's not soaked enough, so you need to soak it some more. I'm actually going to go ahead and add a second one to this. And yeah, just let those soak for a while. We'll come back later and add them to our containers. So I do want to mention too that I use Oasis brand floral foam because it's the best one. The stuff you can get inside craft stores just does not hold up well because it's just not as good of floral foam. So I definitely recommend Oasis brand. So now that we have soaked the foam, we're going to move on to step number 2, which is cutting and securing the foam into the vase. And for this container, the top is wider than the bottom, so I kind of have to measure a bunch to get the foam to fit in there well. So I was just took the whole brick of foam and held it to the top of the container just to see how the width of the foam versus the container, and just kind of get a ballpark here. I'm cutting this brick in half to start with, and then I'll trim it down as needed to fit better into the container. So after that foam is cut again, I'm going to just remeasure, and I'm pushing down slightly just to leave a little indent in where the face is, so I know approximately where to cut. And in this instance, the top of the vase is wider than the bottom, so I do have to go inward while I'm cutting. So kind of just cut in at those corners off and cut into like a groove like inward, so the bottom is more narrow than the top is. And it winds up that this is sticking out a little bit, so I'm just gonna kind of measure here with my knife and just know that's about where I need to cut, just to cut it down so that it's sticking up only a little bit above the container. That top off, and now it fits more better into the container, and it is a little bit wobbly in there, so I'm just going to secure it more with other pieces of foam on the sides. And these foam pieces are just purely to secure the foam in there. I'm not necessarily going to use them for like to stick the stems into, and that's mostly because I don't want the stem to go in and then rest in that gap that's in between the two pieces of foam. So I'm just kind of using this for stability of the foam. Now, of course, you can stick it directly on top of that foam and get the wetness that the stem needs, but yeah, I'm not really going to use those pieces on the side there. So now you need to secure the foam into the vase, and to do that use wet floral tape, and you can use clear or green. I use green just because that's mostly what I have on hand. So just cut. In this instance, I'm going to make the railroad tracks or hashtag, pound sign, whatever you want to call it. It like just to secure all the way across. And the reason I'm doing this one instead of like just an X across the top of this container is because I want a stem that's going to go directly in the center there, and I don't want the tape blocking that. So I'm just making sure that it's secure, but gets, I still can stick the flower in where I want. And so next I'm securing the tape down with a little tiny piece of tape onto the vase, and that's just my own paranoia of the tape coming off, and just making sure it's super secure. You don't have to do this step if you don't want to, but it does secure the tape in there for your foam better into your container, so things don't just come out or fall apart on you, especially if you're going to be moving this arrangement around after it's made. Like I said, this isn't 100% necessary, but it just gives it a little bit more security. And you can see it on the side of the container there. It's just a little tiny piece on the tape that's down on the cross sections there. Here are some designs that use floral foam. You can learn to make them too with tutorials inside Centerpieces Simplified. Check that out at centerpiecessimplified.com.